Thanks for joining us for Tea and Trowels, the series from the Florida Public Archaeology Network, where we chat with archaeologists about their research and what archaeology means to them. I'm Emily Jane Murray, one of your hosts, and today I'm very excited to be chatting with Dr. Gordon Rakita, professor of anthropology at the University of North Florida. Hi, Gordon. Thanks for joining us.
Hey there. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Would you like to say anything else about yourself and then tell us about the mug that you brought?
Yeah, I'm just a bioarchaeologist. I work at the University of North Florida, so I'm only about an hour and a half north of you. So we may be a degree or two chillier than you are today. Finally getting our fall weather here in Florida. My mug is it's a travel mug, and it's got some artwork that my son did. It's a cartoon drawing of a porcupine. And it's kind of an homage to the famous Belgian artist René Magritte picture of a pipe. And under it, the caption reads in French, "This is not a pipe." Well, the caption reads in French, "This is not a pig." So the idea being, it's a porcupine. So that's my mug for today.
Very fun. Well, I brought one with lovely flowers on it because, as you say, you're a bioarchaeologist, but you also study like the mortuary traditions that go along with all the burials. So one of the traditions in our culture is, of course, flowers on graves. So.
Mm-hmm. And now is about the time for many people around the world to decorate gravestones with flowers. We just passed Dia de los Muertos, so. Do they do anything for Dia de los Muertos in St. Augustine?
Not quite. They have like at Talamato Cemetery today, they did a blessing of the graves. So they do those kinds of things, but it's nothing like you see in some of the Hispanic cultures elsewhere in the world. So yeah. Well, what made you want to become an archaeologist?
So as you know, I got some of these questions ahead of time, so I'm thinking about it, and embarrassingly, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in '81 when I was 10 years old, and so obviously that had an influence. I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but it was certainly a formative first experience of archaeology, if you will. But really, actually, I mean, I went to the university not thinking I was going to be an anthropologist. Didn't even know much about anthropology, but I took a intro to anthropology course, and then I took a physical anthropology course, and I met the professor who ultimately became my undergraduate advisor, Mary Kay Sanford. This is at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And she is an amazing anthropologist, and it was such a fascinating class. And she asked me to be her TA in subsequent semesters, and asked me to work in her lab. And so I got to work in her lab. She was working with a collection of skeletal remains from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. And that was a really interesting, I mean, for an undergraduate to get to work in a lab with human remains, that was pretty exciting stuff. So she really definitely got me bit with the bioarchaeology bug. And so, I kind of credit her with really getting me hooked into that side of archaeology. So that's how I got interested in it. And when I started taking anthropology classes, it was like, wow, there's one discipline that you can study all of this, and that's really exciting and cool. And so and the nice thing about teaching at University of North Florida is we're a small undergraduate program. But we've got really great students, and the faculty get to teach lots of different classes, and our students are interested in lots of different things. So we're always getting to dive into different aspects of anthropology, even ones that we may not specialize in. It's like we've got a student who's interested. Okay, well then the student and the faculty member will go off and explore that area of anthropology together. And so that's really, really exciting. So.
I'm always impressed by the quality of work that the students in the department there, because they're doing, graduate student things that you would expect out of graduate students at other schools as undergrads. And I mean, just so many great great archaeologists have come through there. So you guys do a fantastic job.
We're really thrilled about the kind of undergraduate research our students do. The department has a research symposium for undergrad, for our, well, actually all of our students, our undergraduates and our graduates. We have a graduate social work program as well, and an undergraduate sociology program. And so the three programs together put on a symposium at the end of the spring term, and all students can present their undergraduate, their research at that symposium. And yeah, we see some amazing research getting done, and that's really super exciting. The downside is they tend to dive into that research project in their senior year, so they finish up their project and they graduate, and some of my colleagues and I are like, well, we need to fail this student, because if they stay an extra year, they could really work on this project some more, and so they just get their handle on conducting research, and they're ready to do exciting things. Now they go off and they do things elsewhere that are exciting, and so that's rewarding too. But would like to keep them a little bit longer. So
get them all trained up, and then the University of Florida and FSU and all the other schools benefit from them, right?
Exactly. So, but that's okay. That's a good thing.
Yep. Well, tell us about some of your research.
So my research works with mortuary practices. You mentioned that, and in particular, I work with mortuary practices of prehistoric people living in the American Southwest and northern Mexico. Specifically, the Casas Grandes culture that's centered around the site of Paquime in northwestern Chihuahua. So for the last 20 years, my work has been looking at the mortuary practices. The major site there, Paquime, was excavated back in the late 50s and early 60s by Charles de Peso, working out of the Amerind Institute. And he published 8 volumes of all the data from his excavations. And he excavated at Paquime and then a bunch of other medium and smaller sites around. And so that's just such an incredible database. You could build a career just analyzing that data. And to a large extent, my work has been re-examining the burials and the mortuary practices in the area, and looking at how changes in mortuary and ritual practices occur or co-occur with changes in socio-political organization. So at around 1200 AD, we see a sort of a fairly massive cultural shift from small little farming hamlets to these large aggregated sort of urban communities of maybe 5,000 people. And populations are clearly aggregating, and there may be some environmental reasons, but what's interesting is they're forming these much larger communities, and that requires them to develop layers of authority and decision-making that they don't have to have in smaller communities. And my research looks at how ritual, and in particular, mortuary ritual and the manipulation of human remains might play in developing levels of authority making and decision making, and people who are in positions to make decisions versus those who have to sort of just abide by those decisions. So looking at the changes in mortuary practices at this critical junction when sociopolitical complexity sort of really explodes in the Southwest.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in historic cemeteries at FPAN, and I mean, you can totally see so much in burial practices, these cultural changes and all the things. So that's fascinating work.
I'm teaching my anthropology of death class this term, and as it so happens, just this week and next week, we're going to be moving into sort of studies of contemporary cemeteries. And there's so much you can do in this area, this part of the world, from St. Augustine all the way up, is just so rich with really amazing cemeteries. I've attended your crypt workshops, and they're amazing. And I've been so thrilled to see you guys continue those. And in fact, I had at least one of my students this term. She said, "I'm going to have to miss your class because I'm going to crypt." And I was like, "That's fine. You do that." So then she's going to be a little bit more prepared to look at cemeteries. this coming week. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I think we're going to go out to one of the local cemeteries here in Jacksonville. It's a small little cemetery, and just take a walk around and see what we can see. There's so much you can learn about a community from a cemetery.
Yes. Well, what's one of your favorite tools in your toolkits when you work on some of these sites?
Well, so I'm gonna cheat, and I brought two tools. And one is sort of a faux tool, and one is a real tool. So the real tool I have, and it's going to be maybe a little bit hard, but it's just a little bamboo skewer. And these are, many bioarchaeologists refer to these as Perino picks. And they're named after Gregory Perino, who was an avocational archaeologist who worked in the lower Illinois Valley, very famous for his excavations, his detailed recording of his excavations, and for making his own tools, including the use of bamboo skewers for excavating, particularly around bone. You want to be very careful, and you can use dental picks, but dental picks can damage bone very easily, and you're less likely to damage bone with a Perino pick. So this is one of my favorite tools, because if I'm using a Perino pick, it probably means that I'm face down in a burial, and that's a pretty it's a pretty exciting place to be for a bioarchaeologist. It's also, it's a controversial place to be for archaeologists today, and I don't do it as much as I used to do it, but it's an interesting experience when you can step back, and it's always useful to step back and remember this was a living person, and it always makes me think a little bit in awe of what I get to do sometimes, and the experience of getting to learn from someone who's hundreds of years old. And so that's pretty exciting. So that's my one tool. The second tool, and this is the little hokey tool, is a theory book, because I always find that one of my favorite tools is archaeological theory. Now, maybe not this particular theory, but archaeological theory. And I think of theory as an important tool as well. And we often have to help our undergraduate students understand the value and importance of theory. They often, they want to excavate, right? And they want to find incredible and interesting things. And there's nothing that is not fun about excavation. Well, I guess maybe you've got poison ivy, or if you've got bad mosquitoes or ticks or poisonous snakes. There's some bad sides to excavating, but excavation can be a lot of fun and exciting. But we try and get students to remember that, all those artifacts, all that data we collect from that site, we're going to take it back to the lab, and we're going to have to not only process it, but we're also going to have to analyze it. And when you analyze it, you do need to use a theoretical perspective. Whether you know it or not, you're using a theoretical perspective or some sort of intellectual framework to understand that archaeological data that you've collected. And depending upon what theoretical perspective you pick, you can look at the same data in radically different ways. And that's pretty neat and exciting. It's sort of intellectually challenging and fun. And so I hope to kind of encourage students to think of theory as fun. I don't always get there. It's hard to convince them that it's as fun as digging, but we try. So those are my two favorite archaeological tools.
Those are both pretty good tools. Yeah, theories, it's like, I find it both fun and also ultimately frustrating, because there's that moment in like your intro to archaeology theory class where like all of the conversations just cycle back to, but are we really learning about the past, or are we just learning about yourself? And it's like, why am I here then?
Right. It can be somewhat frustrating. I mean, I think even, professional archaeologists at certain times just sort of step back and go, well, I just want the answer, right? I don't, and we've had in the history of archaeology, we've had the field of the discipline of archaeology has been variably interested in theory and not interested in theory. So, in the late 60s and 70s, theory was big, and that even continued into the 80s and 90s with the critique of processualism. Theory was big, and then we moved into basically about when I was graduating with my PhD in the early 2000s, then all of a sudden theory wasn't very interesting to anyone. Everyone just wanted to do archaeology. So yeah, I think there's still a certain level of that now. Just do archaeology. Don't worry about the theory.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the kind of commercialization of it, I think it gets lost. And that's, I mean, I think that's the goal, is you have to like find the like nice line down the middle where you have a theoretical underpinning, but you're also like just getting the data. And, you know, I'll say sometimes I think we also don't, like you're saying, you have to take a step back and realize like it's a person. It's like people do weird things too. So we can theorize all sorts of answers. And the answer could have just been like, I don't know, they liked yellow. So.
Well, and I think, and you're exactly right. And, you know, one of the things that we in bioarchaeology are having to come to grips with is, from a theoretical standpoint, is looking at our own sort of biases and our own sort of philosophical baggage that we bring, and recognizing that, I mean, we have to deal with the reality that we're excavating someone, typically in the United States, we're excavating someone else's ancestors. And we have to come to grips with that, both theoretically and ethically. And often that means, you know, the upside is that often means that we need to engage with indigenous populations. And we need to do more of that. We should have done more of that in the past. We need to do more of that. It makes for a richer archaeology. It makes for better archaeology, more ethical archaeology. And I think, you know, you can look at the sort of the controversies within archaeology today. A lot of them stem from the fact that we need to be much more thoughtful about how we engage with the populations that are affected by our interpretations of their past. And that's something we can't avoid anymore, and we shouldn't avoid anymore. And so I'd like to think it makes for a more exciting future for archaeology, because it's going to force us to become much more engaged with communities, and that's good. And organizations like FPAN, which do that on a daily basis, engaging with communities, that's going to be where it's at in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if we're building this base of knowledge and not using it for anything, it's like, why? What are we even doing then? So we'll move on to our next question here. Do you have a best worst field story that you can now laugh about?
Yeah, there are plenty of stories. I have one that I have in mind. It's back from 2006. I was working with a couple of archaeologists, one a Mexican archaeologist with INA, Francisco Zuniga, Pancho Zuniga, and two of my colleagues from the University of Missouri, Todd Van Poel and Christine Van Poel. The Van Poels and I went to grad school together, and they also work in the Southwest and in Northern Mexico. And the four of us were running a survey in an area in northern Chihuahua around a little town called Janos. It's not much more than a truck stop. And we were working, we were doing survey, sort of a reconnaissance survey, and we found a really interesting site. It was a little bedrock outcrop that the locals called Cerro del Diablo, Hill of the Devil. And it's got these large bedrock, escarpments, and then within them were hundreds of mortars that had been excavated by prehistoric people and were being used to process some sort of probably vegetative material. And we were working at that site, mapping it and recording it. And also it was covered with rock art. So really, really fascinating, interesting site. I had taken a crew. I was using a rented Suburban that we'd brought down, and I had a crew out somewhere else, and I brought them over to this site where Todd and Pancho and Christine were working. and we did some more work, and then we were finishing up for the day. It was about 3 o'clock, and in the Chihuahua heat at about 3 o'clock, that's when you want to head in. And so Todd and Pancho and I were finishing up something, and we said, well, you guys take the other vehicles. We'll keep the Suburban, and we'll follow you in about an hour. And so we stayed out at the site, and we did some more work. And unbeknownst to me, when I drove into the site, I must have run over some barbed wire or something like that, because I had a flat tire. So the three of us finish up, and it's hot, and we're tired, and we want to get in. We've earned our beer for the day, and we get to the car, and flat tire. We're like, okay, no problem. We got this. We'll just change the tire. No problem. Well, unbeknownst to me, the rental agency had sent me out with a broken jack. And so we had no working jack and a flat tire. And we were far enough away from town that it would have been probably about a 2 or 3 hour hike. And we could have done it. We certainly could have done it. But we thought, well, once we're not back at the field house within an hour, Christine's going to realize, oh, something must have happened, and she's going to send some folks out, and they'll come out in a vehicle, and they'll have a jack, and we'll be fine. And ultimately, that's what happened. But the sort of the funny part of this story was this Suburban that I had rented was sort of a little bit of a luxurious Suburban for, I don't know what the rental agency thought I was going to do. But I guess they didn't think I was going to take it on back roads in rural Chihuahua. But it had one of these television screens that folds down in the back seat, and you could play DVDs. And this was back in 2006. This was pretty luxurious. I mean, I didn't have a car like this. And I happened to have a DVD of The Magnificent Seven. And so Pancho and Todd and I are like, well, what are we going to do for a couple of hours out here in the heat? Well, we climbed in the back seat of the car. We turned on the air conditioner. We put on The Magnificent Seven, and the three of us just watched The Magnificent Seven for an hour until the crew came out and rescued us. And it was pretty surreal, because we were in this, this pretty nice backseat of this car watching a movie in the air conditioning, but you look at the scene in the movie that's set in the West and in Mexico, and then you'd look out and there was Mexico, and it was very, very surreal. So watching Yul Brynner and Charles Bronson ride horses across, you kind of expected them to come up over the hill of the site, and so it was funny. It was funny at the time, I think. So we laughed about it a lot then. So
yeah, it's the rental agencies with archaeologists. It's like trying to explain to them what you need the car for, and like they never quite understand it. And yeah, my husband has lots of he works in CRM and does a lot of logistics for the company, and there's like all sorts of misunderstandings of what they need versus what they actually get from the rental agencies.
Yeah, and you want, when I would take my own vehicle out, after the first couple of times you run through a mesquite bush and you get that long scrape down the side, you're like, okay, well, now it's a field vehicle. I don't have to worry about it looking nice ever again. So it takes the pressure off for sure. Then you'll run through any arroyos that you come across.
Well, we saved our big question for last here. How do you think archaeology can help save the world?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be much of an archaeologist if I couldn't answer this question, right? Because this is the big one, right? So I mean, I think today one of the best examples of how archaeology can save the world is in terms of talking about environmental change. Archaeologists inevitably are looking at how humans have responded to environmental change. Now, that may not be your particular theoretical or topical bent, and not all archaeologists explore that, but many do. And most of us have to take into consideration how environment is impacting the groups that we are exploring and studying. And so I think the insights that archaeologists can bring to the world in terms of how humans have responded to environmental change, or how they haven't responded to environmental change, and how that's impacted those societies is really important. when we look at things like in the Southwest, the Hohokam building canals so that they can establish thriving communities in what is a desert. That's pretty impressive, and that can tell us a lot about how humans can impact the environment, the local environment, but also that environment can impact them. And this is still important to humans today, right? Environmental impacts are all around us. We live in Florida. I mean, I don't have a beach house. I'm about 15 minutes from the beach, which is just about right because as sea levels rise, I'll have beachfront property at some point. But by the time I have beachfront property, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to lose their houses, and that's going to be some serious disruption. So humans are facing this, and we're facing it. We're facing environmental degradation like no other human population probably seen it in the past. So dealing with that, I think it's going to take insights from archaeology. I think also understanding why some, from my own perspective, understanding why some communities thrive and don't, and how they make different cultural or social arrangements to survive. So in my part of the world, in the American Southwest, we see these large aggregated communities developing, and then after several hundred years, they tend to fall apart. But sometimes they stick around, and how they manage to stick around and survive with the tensions that large urban communities can bring. I think that's important too. Here again, in our contemporary society, we're facing conflict and inner tensions within our own society. And how do populations respond to those? How do they respond successfully and not successfully? I think those are important lessons we can learn. And then protecting our cultural heritage. We have a tremendous amount of cultural heritage. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting cultural heritage, not just here on the first coast of Florida, but also anywhere in the world. And so preserving that cultural heritage, and then also developing empathy and consideration and understanding for indigenous populations, something we perhaps not focused on as much as we should, but I think we are focusing on it more these days. I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I think I talked to Uzi Baram a few weeks ago, and like one of his big takeaways was just like this long depth of perspective on people doing things and existing, and like you're talking about like cultures like coming together and then like breaking apart, and I think we all kind of take for granted, we just expect our current geopolitical whatever to exist in perpetuity, and
archaeology gives us a view that is not necessarily the case.
No.
Right? Yeah, that the vast majority of human societies have collapsed in one way or another, right? And so why should we expect ours to go on forever?
Yeah.
That's a little bit apocalyptic.
But people could keep on keeping on, and we just figure out something new to do, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, in that vein of thoughts, with everything that's happened in 2020, what's been keeping you sane lately?
So yes, there's a couple of things. My family's been keeping me sane. They surely, at least they've been telling me when I've been acting insane. So and they have no problem doing that. We adopted a cat about a year ago, and so that's been keeping me sane. It at least keeps me on a routine because he's very routiny. So it's almost time for lunch for him, and he will come and get me for lunch. So that's been keeping me sane, and then also we've gone back to the universities opened up, and some faculty have elected to teach face to face, and I'm one of them. And so getting to go back in the classroom is really keeping me sane. And we're masked up and we're socially distancing. And I've got some students who are attending remotely, but just being back in the classroom, talking about anthropology of death is really, it's exciting. It's always exciting for me. And there are a lot of times in the middle of the class that I forget about the masks and I forget about the pandemic. and I can just be thinking about whatever we're talking about at the time. And that's really, that's really sane making. So.
Like you take for granted the mundane.
Right.
And then you don't have it. And it's like, oh man, what it would be like to just go like sit in a restaurant or.
And so when you get a snippet of the mundane, the normal, you're like, oh wow, this is, I'm never going to take this for granted ever, right? Yeah, I mean, I used to carry coffee or tea to class with me, and I don't do that anymore just because I don't want to be messing with my mask. But it's simple things like that. So, but we'll get there. I'm fairly hopeful. So I have to be.
Yep. I feel ya. Better to be optimistic. So, well, thanks for chatting with us today, and thanks to everyone watching at home. Cheers.
Cheers.